Tales of the Wilderness, the Rise and Fall of the Northwest Company. Amidst the vast and unexplored North American wilderness, two treasures beckoned explorers, the sparkling gold of the South and the opulent furs of the North. These treasures weren't just commodities. They were catalysts for daring enterprises that forged a path into the heart of untamed lands, slowly revealing the secrets of the wilderness. In this tale, we journey through time to a period when the fiery Spaniard chased after the allure of gold, while the adroit Frenchman and calculating Briton ventured into the Hyperborean regions, trading in furs that proved as lucrative as the treasures of the tropics. It was the fur trade in particular that breathed life into the great Canadian provinces. Lacking precious metals, these regions were initially overlooked by their European colonizers. The French adventurers, however, who had settled on the banks of the St. Lawrence, soon found that in the rich peltries of the interior they had sources of wealth that might almost rival the mines of Mexico and Peru. As the trapping became less and less fruitful near settlements, the indigenous people ventured further into the wilderness on hunting expeditions. Accompanied by traders, they explored and discovered new territories, creating a symbiotic relationship that fueled the trade and beckoned civilization. They brought quantities of the most precious kinds and bartered them away for European trinkets and cheap commodities. Immense profits were thus made by the early traders, and the traffic was pursued with avidity. In this way the trade augmented and was drawn from remote quarters to Montreal. Every now and then a large body of Ottawas, Hurons, and other tribes who hunted the countries bordering on the Great Lakes would come down in a squadron of light canoes, laden with beaver skins and other spoils of their year's hunting. A camp of birch bark would be pitched outside the town, and a primitive fair would unfold, complete with ceremonious conferences between traders and the Governor-General. Their wants and caprices being supplied, they would take leave of the governor, strike their tents, launch their canoes, and ply their way up the Ottawa to the lakes. A new and anomalous class of men gradually grew out of this trade. These were called coureurs des bois, rangers of the woods, originally men who had joined in hunting expeditions and made themselves acquainted with remote tracts and tribes, and who now became, as it were, peddlers of the wilderness. These men would set out from Montreal with canoes well stocked with goods, with arms and ammunition, and would make their way up the mazy and wandering rivers that interlace the vast forests of the Canadas, coasting the most remote lakes and creating new wants and habitudes among the natives. Sometimes they sojourned for months among them, assimilating to their tastes and habits with the happy facility of Frenchmen, adopting in some degree the Indian dress, and not infrequently taking to themselves wives. 12, 15, 18 months would often elapse without any tidings of them, when they would come sweeping their way down the Ottawa in full glee, their canoes laden down with packs of beaver skins. Now came their turn for revelry and extravagance. "You would be amazed," says an old writer already quoted, "if you saw how lewd these peddlers are when they return, how they feast and game, and how prodigal they are, not only in their clothes, but upon their sweethearts. Such of them as are married have the wisdom to retire to their own houses. But the bachelors act just as pirates are wont to do, for they lavish, eat, drink, and play all away as long as the goods hold out. And when these are gone, they even sell their embroidery, their lace, and their clothes. This done, they are forced upon a new voyage for subsistence. To counteract the excesses and irregularities of these ventures, an order was issued by the French government prohibiting all persons, on pain of death, from trading into the interior of the country without a license. These licenses were granted in writing by the Governor-General, and at first were given only to persons of respectability, to gentlemen of broken fortunes, to old officers of the army who had families to provide for, or to their widows. Each license permitted the fitting out of 2 large canoes with merchandise for the lakes, and no more than 25 licenses were to be issued in 1 year. By degrees, however, private licenses were also granted, and the number rapidly increased. Those who did not choose to fit out the expeditions themselves were permitted to sell them to the merchants. These employed the rangers of the woods to undertake the long voyages on shares, and thus the abuses of the old system were revived and continued. The pious missionaries employed by the Roman Catholic Church to convert the native people did everything in their power to counteract the profligacy caused and propagated by these men in the heart of the wilderness. The Catholic chapel might often be seen planted beside the trading house, and its spire surmounted by a cross, towering from the midst of an Indian village on the banks of a river or a lake. The missions had often a beneficial effect on the simple sons of the forest, but had little power over the renegades from civilization. At length it was found necessary to establish fortified posts at the confluence of the rivers and the lakes for the protection of the trade and the restraint of these profligates of the wilderness. The most important of these was at Michilimackinac, which connects Lakes Huron and Michigan. It became the great interior mart and place of deposit, and some of the regular merchants who prosecuted the trade in person under their licenses formed establishments here. It became a rendezvous for the rangers of the woods, as well as those who came up with goods from Montreal. Here new expeditions were fitted out and took their departure for Lake Michigan and the Mississippi, Lake Superior, and the Northwest. And here the peltries brought in return were embarked for Montreal. The Canadian traders for a long time had troublesome competitors in the British merchants of New York, who inveigled trappers to their posts and traded with them on more favorable terms. Then Hudson's Bay Company, chartered by Charles II, was founded in 1670 with the exclusive privilege of establishing trading houses on the shores of that bay and its tributary rivers. Between this British company and the French merchants of Canada, feuds and contests arose about alleged infringements of territorial limits, and acts of violence and bloodshed occurred between their agents. In 1762, the French lost possession of Canada, and the trade fell principally into the hands of British subjects. The trappers were slow to accustom themselves to the habits and manners of their British employers. They missed the freedom, indulgence, and familiarity of the old French trading houses and did not relish the sober exactness, reserve, and method of the newcomers. The British traders, too, were ignorant of the country and distrustful of the natives. In 1783, a new chapter unfolded with the creation of the Northwest Company, an alliance of merchants that held a lordly sway over the North American wilderness. Their grand annual gathering at Fort William showcased a blend of Scottish aristocracy and frontier resilience. Fort William was a considerable village on the banks of Lake Superior. Here, in an immense wooden building, was the great council hall, as also the banqueting chamber, decorated with arms and accoutrements of the native tribes, along with trophies of the fur trade. The house swarmed at this time with traders and voyageurs. some from Montreal, bound to the interior posts, some from the interior posts, bound to Montreal. The councils were held in great state, for every member felt as if sitting in Parliament, and every retainer and dependent looked up to the assemblage with awe, as to the House of Lords. There was a vast deal of solemn deliberation and hard Scottish reasoning, with an occasional swell of pompous declamation. These grave and weighty councils were alternated by huge feasts and revels, like some of the old feasts described in Highland castles. The tables in the great banqueting room groaned under the weight of game of all kinds, of venison from the woods and fish from the lakes, with hunters' delicacies, such as buffaloes' tongues and beavers' tails, and various luxuries from Montreal, all served up by experienced cooks brought for the purpose. There was no stint of generous wine, for it was a hard drinking period, a time of loyal toasts and bacchanalian songs, and brimming bumpers. Their merriment was echoed and prolonged by a mongrel legion of retainers, voyageurs, hunters, and vagabonds. The lords of the lakes and forests were gone, their stories etched into the annals of time. The Northwest Company's legacy lives on, a complex chapter in the grand saga of North America's untamed history.